In the United States, gun violence is a major public health issue. So in total, there are about 43,000 deaths each year due to guns. About double the number, almost 80,000 injuries that lead to hospitalizations. And these injuries can be very severe. They can lead to lifelong disability, highly costly for the healthcare system and for individuals and their families. So in total, it's estimated that gun violence costs the country over $500 billion each year. So this represents the healthcare costs associated with violence, the crime and safety issues, lost productivity, the tremendous psychological trauma that entire communities face.
How it has become an election issue? What do you think of that?
Yeah, so in the U.S., gun violence, unfortunately, it's always been a very partisan issue. Generally people on the right side of the spectrum are worried about their gun rights, and people on the left side of the spectrum are more supportive of gun safety policies, which data shows would reduce gun violence. However, it means that Americans would have less freedom in how they can own guns, how they can store guns, who can own a gun, how many guns they can own, what type of guns they can own. And historically, if you look all the way back to the Revolutionary War, gun ownership among citizens was a major reason that the United States was able to win the Revolutionary War against Britain. Because ordinary citizens had guns, they were able to rise up against a world superpower at that time. So historically, that Second Amendment right, protecting the right to bear arms, it's been a very key component of the fabric of our the way that we came up as a country and kind of our political identity almost. Over time, of course, as gun violence became more of an issue, and especially in recent years, the number of deaths and injuries has skyrocketed, particularly among children. Gun violence is now the number one cause of death for children. It surpasses even motor vehicle accidents, cancer, drug overdoses. Guns are actually the most likely reason a child in the United States will die currently. So as this becomes more predominant, there are efforts to improve gun safety. There have been some bipartisan efforts that have successfully gone through Congress as well in the year 2022. However, in general, it's a very partisan issue. So there's a Pew study, I can send that to you as well. Yeah, there's a Pew study that came out recently that surveyed Biden and Trump supporters and asked a series of questions related to their feelings about gun safety, gun rights, and across the board, Biden supporters were much more likely to be supportive of gun safety policies, to feel that the fact that there are more guns in this country than people, that's a problem. And Trump supporters are more likely to be concerned about the right to bear arms and the potential threat to the Second Amendment that would come from gun safety policies.
How this issue can be resolved? Can there be, or do you think this will be political impasse throughout, and every week we hear that one shooting or other has happened, right?
Yeah. So I think there are a few rays of hope. So first of all, the Surgeon General, the U.S. Surgeon General Vivek Murthy, has declared gun violence to be a public health issue. So he has officially issued an advisory just recently. It's spurred by the rise over the last 2 years, especially since the COVID-19 pandemic, of the increase in gun violence. Particularly among children, the number of deaths increased by 50% in just 2 years. It's now around 2,500 deaths per year among children, 43,000 nationwide. So the fact that there's becoming more awareness that this is a public health issue, that it's becoming costly to the country. There are true economic, financial costs associated with gun violence. The Medicare and Medicaid program pay for a large portion of these costs if the victims are on public insurance. The unemployment rate is affected by gun violence. Labor productivity is affected by gun violence. I think as people become more aware, connecting the dots between gun ownership or uncontrolled gun ownership and these types of costs that affect the entire society. There is more support to at least move towards a bipartisan solution. So, one such policy could be restricting assault weapons, for example. So assault weapons are used in most mass shootings, and there's very strong data that shows that states that restrict or ban the sale of assault weapons, they tend to see immediate drops in the number of mass shootings or multiple victim shootings. It's much more difficult for a perpetrator to carry out such a huge violent crime with a simple weapon. Really, they tend to use assault weapons. So that's an area where there's potential to see some bipartisan support. We're not restricting all guns, just one particular type of gun. As well as people who have had repeat offenses in the past, requiring background checks, ensuring that people who have a history of violence, it's harder for them to own a weapon that will enable them to commit more violence.
And what does your research says?
Yeah, so we've done some research on this topic in the area of mass shootings, particularly. So mass shootings represent a small number of deaths in terms of total gun violence. So out of 43,000 deaths each year that are caused by guns, a mass shooting represents a very small fraction of them. But they loom very large in the public consciousness. Because when a mass shooting happens, typically it happens in a public area, in a community, in a time where nobody would have ever thought that something like this would have happened. And if there's a shooting that happens at a school or a library or a mall or another public place, it shocks the entire community. And that's what our research shows. So what we did was we compared communities that had mass shooting events versus those that did not yet have a mass shooting event. And we looked at survey data. So this was survey data that from the Gallup survey that's conducted independent of the mass shooting event. And in one of the questions in that survey data, a series of questions, they ask about people's mental and emotional well-being, as well as their sense of safety in their community. So these questions, the survey is fielded on a regular basis to thousands of Americans each day, independent of whether, what's going on in the community. And we found that in the days following the mass shooting, there was a rise in emotional trauma among people surveyed, even if they weren't there present when the shots were fired. As long as they lived in the community where the event happened, we saw a rise in emotional trauma. We saw a decrease in the sense of community safety as compared to people who lived in communities where this violence did not happen. So this represents, very real social costs on public health in entire communities. It shows that mass shootings affect not only the victims and their families, but it also affects the entire community in which the shooting event happens.
Do you have any figures on how it impacts the Indian American community, or how much deaths of Indian Americans have?
Yeah, that's a good question. I can send you some data. I'll look it up and send it to you. In general, about 13% of mass shootings are racially motivated. So the shooter was particularly targeting either some particular racial minority group or a religious minority group. I think, the last few elections, gun violence has always been a big issue. This particular election, I think it'll be an especially large issue because of the Surgeon General's recent advisory highlighting gun violence as a public health issue. And the sheer numbers are bringing people out into the open. There is more awareness about the number of deaths, especially the fact that children and adolescents are dying at alarming rates from gun violence. However, I think in spite of that, I don't know how easy it is to swing a person from one side to the other when it comes to gun safety. I think we'll have to be creative in thinking about solutions that go above and beyond gun control laws, or being creative in ways to bring people to this same table. There is research showing that after a mass shooting happens in a state, there is political awareness about gun violence. However, states that have Republican-controlled legislatures tend to pass weaker gun safety laws, or more laws that protect gun rights in the wake of mass shootings. And on the other side, states that have Democratic-controlled legislatures, they tend to pass stronger gun safety measures in the aftermath of a shooting. So, the idea is that people who live in the people who live in Republican states, the mass shooting makes them more worried about their gun safety, their gun rights. So then they press their legislators to pass more gun rights laws. And the people who live in more democratically controlled states, it's the opposite side of the story. So there is, as you said, there is a deadlock. Yeah.
Which state Democratic or Republicans have more gun violence?
So in general, the states that have stronger gun safety laws have lower rates of gun violence. Mostly Democratic states, yes. Yeah, and that is, I don't know that it's because of the Democrat versus Republican, it's just that the gun safety laws do work. So there's, studies, hundreds of studies showing that, and they all lead to the same results, that states that have stronger gun safety laws tend to have lower rates of gun violence, and states that have banned assault weapons tend to have fewer mass shootings.